Meeting to order. First order of business, I'd like to apologize for being late. We had a couple of things we had to decide in closed session. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for coming tonight. Pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Laws of 1975, this meeting has been duly advertised in the Espark Press issue of January 21st, 2014. All municipal clerks of the townships and boroughs within the regional high school district have been duly notified, and the requirements of posting the notices have been met. Okay, approval of the minutes.
Before you do, Mr. Moses, if I may, just one amendment on the minutes as presented and as included on the agenda. Item G4A was included in the overall motion. It should be separated. It has been now moved down to separate beyond the K section, which is administration, with the appropriate motion second, and the vote has been moved down there as well. So just that, the adjustment, the format, some of it, but the one change is it was a second motion and second and vote. Which wasn't reflected on the original version.
Okay, let's see. We have to vote on the minutes?
Yep.
Okay. Minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes.
Any discussion? Fantastic. Mr. Boyce?
Mr. Acetola?
Yes.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Ms. Fankhauser?
Yes.
Mr. Messinger?
Yes.
Mrs. Sutera?
Yes.
Ms. Tomazic?
Yes.
Mr. Moses?
Yes. Okay, communications reports on file. Superintendent's report.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We have a full evening tonight. We're going to open up with, as you know, our executive cabinet members. The superintendent are here, representing each of our high schools, and these young ladies and men have been presenting over the course of the past couple of months. Hallie Proper and Michelle Galino are the last two to go this evening, representing Manalapan and Howell, respectively. So I'd like to call Hallie Proper to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Hallie Proper, and I am a proud senior of Manalapan High School, and one in my family of 7 sisters who have walked the halls of MHS. First, I would like to thank Mr. Angelosi for selecting me to represent my school on the Executive Student Cabinet to the Superintendent. I would also like to thank Dr. Hazel and Mr. Sampson for allowing me to work with them during this school year. I have always been involved in my community through volunteer work and extracurricular activities. I am very grateful that the Executive Board has provided me with an opportunity to enhance my leadership skills and broaden my scope of involvement in activities in the neighboring towns and other schools in the district. Mr. Sampson and Dr. Hazel have taught us that change happens when we assess and reflect on our current system practices to make improvements for the future. Although it is easy to list the many reasons why my school is so amazing, the best lessons we learn are the ones that challenge us. I could stand here all night and tell you about the accomplishments Manalapan High School has achieved this year. I could boast about our football team's 3 consecutive years in the state championships. I could tell you how our soccer team won the Shore Conference tournament. I could tell you how our Battle of the Classes teams worked together to raise $2,000 for juvenile diabetes. I could brag about how peer leadership raised $2,000 for Sylvia's Children, an organization to fund education in Uganda, or the high percentage of students graduating and going to college. But the accomplishment for which I am most proud is being part of a community at Manalapan High School where students with diverse talents and gifts can develop and flourish. After all, what is the high school experience all about? Isn't high school the place where we are encouraged to grow? Isn't it the place where we are taught to celebrate our differences? Isn't it a place where we look to feel safe as we grow into adulthood? Of all the accomplishments that my high school is credited for, the one that I am most impressed by is that Manalapan High School provides a culture of acceptance, encouragement, and opportunity. It recognizes and celebrates the best in each student and helps each student achieve their goals and aspirations. After all, isn't that what high school is about? On a final note this evening, I would like to thank all of the teachers that have dedicated their lives to all of us. Forrest Witchcraft, a teacher and scholar, once said, 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove. But the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. You are important to all of us. You have made a difference in all of our lives. Thank you.
I gotta. Hallie, I've been saying your last name incorrectly all year. You haven't corrected me once. Come on. Go ahead, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay. It is my honor and privilege to be presenting to you this evening. On behalf of Howell High School, I would personally like to thank Mrs. Durbig, Dr. Hazel, and Mr. Sampson, and the Board of Education for giving me this distinguished honor to serve on the Superintendent's Executive Cabinet. As a member of the Cabinet, I serve my school as a liaison to the Superintendent, as a voice for the Howell High School student body, and report back to my building principal. Throughout this rewarding experience, I've had the pleasure of working very closely with Dr. Hazel, Mr. Sampson, and 5 of my fellow cabinet members from their respective high schools. We have met monthly to discuss district initiatives and concerns, and had drafted a new constitution for next year's cabinet. We are very excited to be participating on June 11th when we present to the newly hired teachers and staff for the upcoming 2014-2015 school year. Our hope is to inspire the new teachers through sharing what we love about the Freehold Regional High School District. The dynamic and mutually rewarding experience evident between the teachers and students is one that is not found elsewhere. We hope to help assimilate them to the FRHSD community so that they will have a smooth transition in the fall. I'm honored to serve in this prestigious position representing my school, Howell High School, home of the Rebel, where the sun always shines. Because Howell is more than just a haven for 2,400 students to go about their 8 45-minute periods. To be a Rebel means so much more. But what does it mean to be a Rebel? It means to be part of a family, making new friends wherever you go, and always receiving a friendly smile from an unfamiliar face in the hallway. It means getting involved in countless clubs and athletic programs I have to offer, and it means raising $200,000 for the American Cancer Society over 3 years on our Relay for Life teams. It means packing the bleachers for homecoming and cheering on our football team, even if it's in the pouring rain. It means watching our bowling team sweep the division, or cheering on the baseball team as they look to clinch a shore conference win. To be a Rebel means being a part of an eclectic student body filled with people from all walks of life. We are united as Rebels, whether it's academically in our Scholar Center for the Humanities, or theatrically talented in our Fine and Performing Arts program. To be a Rebel means so much more. To be a Rebel means everything. And I've had an amazing experience at Howell High School. Howell offers a variety of opportunity for every student. They've opened tremendous doors for our students, and if it weren't for their extensive programs and athletics, I wouldn't be where I am today. Thanks to the hard work, dedication, and outstanding record of our bowling team, I will be attending Felician College on a full-ride bowling scholarship this year. And thank you. And even though I'm graduating, I will always be a Rebel. The sun will always shine a path wherever I go in life. Because being a Rebel has made me the person I am today and who I will be tomorrow. Thank you.
Michelle, could you do me a favor, please? My name is Mr. Moses. Hi. Would you tell my music theory half-sibling that I said hello? Thank you.
So we, at our last session, the executive cabinet members and Dr. Hazel and myself, they went through, in preparation for the new hire meeting on June 11th, they went through the attributes as they defined it of an exceptional teacher. And in each one of them has taken a category and is crafting within that framework what an exceptional teacher looks like for Freehold Regional High School District. So that's the message they're going to deliver to the new hires on June 11th, which I think is way more powerful coming from them than from me. So thank you, and you guys can skedaddle. I know it's late, so don't get stuck staying there, and we appreciate you coming out. Thanks to the parents for coming out this evening as well.
You're all by yourself, so you have it. Come on.
What does it mean to be a rebel?
Being by yourself.
I know, he's fickle. He's fickle, isn't he? He's fickle.
So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Howell, who our Director of Guidance and Operations, to deliver the Violence, Vandalism, and Substance Abuse report. Remember that a few years back, the Department of Education mandated that you report out twice a year on your violence and vandalism numbers, which comes from your Evers report in the state. A lot of school districts simply sort of read off the list of the number of events that they had or occurrences, and that meets the criteria. We like to be as transparent as possible about it and do a more extensive presentation. So, Mrs. Howell?
Thank you. Yes, and you are pronouncing my last name correctly. So, Ms. Howell. Tonight I'm presenting our district report of violence, vandalism, and substance abuse. This report is required biannually and includes Phase 1 incidents, those from September to December of 2013. I want to mention that this information is also carefully reviewed internally at the school and district level. It's important for our own practice to review student discipline data and continue to develop intervention strategies and proactive approaches. As a 6 high school district with close to 12,000 students, we're uniquely aware of how this impacts our reporting. We recognize that at times, students, especially 14 to 18-year-olds, don't always make the right choices, and we have a responsibility to help modify that behavior and engage in as many proactive measures as possible to limit the behavior. Our focus as a school district is on teaching and learning, and there are many lessons related to student behavior that are also a component of the education a student receives while at the Freehold Regional High School District. As you can see, incidents are classified into 5 separate categories as defined by the state. And as an overview, for the first phase of the 13-14 school year, there were 34 incidents of violence, 5 incidents of vandalism, 3 weapons offenses, 39 incidents of substance abuse, and 10 incidents of confirmed harassment, intimidation, and bullying. This year, we are again below our overall 3-year average for total incidents. These next tables show each category more specifically. Violence included 15 incidents of simple assault and 10 incidents of both threats and fights. Of the weapons identified, 2 were knives and 1 was a razor blade. And none of the weapons were used in the context of a fight or an assault. The next tables include greater detail on the incidents of vandalism and substance abuse. Under the category of substance abuse, the number of students found to be under the influence remained identical to last year, and the number of students engaged in possession or distribution actually decreased. The predominant substance used continues to be marijuana. Fortunately, we had 0 incidents of students under the influence of narcotics. This is especially reassuring considering that all of the concerns within Monmouth and Ocean County over the last year. And there's been considerable outreach and communication between the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office and local school districts to really educate our community and stay informed. In fact, this past December, we hosted a representative from the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office for their presentation, Heroin Kills. And a similar event is taking place at the Manalapan Englishtown Middle School tomorrow. Each of our high schools has designated student assistance coordinators who work closely with our building administration and all of our families. Our code of conduct for substance abuse includes educating and supporting students who may be abusing illegal substances. Over the 3-year period, you can see where the peak issues occurred on a month-by-month comparison. Our incidents were relatively consistent across each month for Phase 1 of this year, with a slight increase in December. This chart includes our harassment, intimidation, and bullying investigations. Our district continues to take a very aggressive approach in investigating potential incidents, and more importantly, in educating our students, with a specific focus on promoting a positive school climate. There is a state-mandated Week of Respect in October, and during this designated week, we have several programs for delivering messages of respect and tolerance. And that's really the same message that's the expectation for the entire school year. We have designated anti-bullying specialists in each school that also engage in ongoing training. And this past March, we posted the results of our required HIB self-assessment, and I'm proud to say that all 6 of our high schools scored exceptionally high on the implementation of the requirements of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act. As you can see, our district really has a number of proactive measures and intervention programs in each high school. There's an ongoing effort from our child study team, our administrators, our guidance counselors, our teachers, our student assistance coordinators to work collaboratively with students and ensure we're providing them with a safe and secure learning environment. We have a very comprehensive student family handbook that outlines consistent rules and responsibilities for our students. This handbook is reviewed each year as we assess and evaluate our procedures, our interventions, and our progressive discipline consequences. One additional change for this current school year, we implemented in-school suspension in all 6 of our high schools. This way, we're able to provide an education and counseling component during the school day. Our school programs also include small group lessons, which are usually through a peer-to-peer approach. Student-created and delivered presentations by clubs like SAD, Students Against Destructive Decisions, and League for Diversity, and assembly programs that include nationally known speakers, including Dr. Mikey Fallon, who does a presentation where our students leave feeling like they can make a positive difference in their schools. So as you can see from all the information provided, we applaud the continuing efforts of our district staff, our student body, and our families in order to continue to maintain a very safe school environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Howe. We have, next, we have a presentation from Dr. Moore and Dr. Santora and Mrs. Meckman about the Common Core state standards, and I'm sure if folks have been sort of following the national dialogue around the Common Core, that there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding of what the Common Core is or is not. I think folks tend to confuse the testing requirements that are accompanying the Common Core standards as the standards themselves. We've just come off of here in the district the pilot testing for PARC, which is the new online assessments that students will be required to take. You know, as a school district, we handled that process quite well. We feel very comfortable and confident where we are in terms of managing, whether it's from an infrastructure perspective all the way through to how we think our students will perform on those assessments. But the Common Core is a lightning rod across the nation. It's been heavily politicized, and we've held off on a formal presentation intentionally until this point in time. But there's been an awful lot of work occurring throughout the school district over the past several years to prepare for this. And what I think folks may fail to realize is that we've been engaged with the Common Core for several years at this point in time. I do think, candidly, that many school districts will struggle with the Common Core, depending on their capacity and their resources and their staffing in terms of how they manage that change. I don't think, I believe firmly that the Freehold Regional High School District will not be one of those districts. I do think that we've been incredibly aggressive in getting out in front of the requirements of the Common Core, so it is a framework from which we operate and nothing more. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you. I want to thank, excuse me, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to update you. Remember, I guess it was last school year that Mr. Angelozzi and Mr. Donahue presented from our Common Core implementation team with an introduction on the what's and whys of the Common Core. The picture we hope to paint for you tonight is, while we will reintroduce you to some of the basics around the organization of the Common Core and talk a bit about testing, we really want to paint a picture of a district that insists on owning its Common Core implementation, through lenses that we've ground. We've ground the lenses, priorities that we've determined, and we take those into our implementation and our alignment. These words, alignment and ownership, mark a lot of what we do throughout the central office and the district as administrators, as teachers. We're really trying to come to terms with mandates in a way that makes sense to our community. In terms of the standards, that means that the standards really should not and should never be done to us, but rather our alignment must be authentic to serve objectives that we've set and declared in our strategic plan and in other places. Can I get the lights? Now, initially, and there are plenty of histories of the Common Core out there. There are conspiratorial histories. There are more orthodox histories. We have to build some of that with you briefly tonight to make the simple case that standards are not new. We've been dealing with standards for a long time. Changes in standards are not new, and they bring costs and frustrations and all kinds of things. But in the Common Core, there are three pieces that come together in a way that have never come together before. We have comparisons to students around the world with our students. Some of those comparisons are faulty. Some of them are compelling. We have attention on tying federal resources to strings. So money from the federal government comes with strings attached. And we also have a concentration on tying teacher and school evaluation to student achievement on tests. These are three things that we've seen. And it was really initially in the early 80s that we had the first calls comparing American children to foreign children in schools. America, a nation at risk, and other reports coming from the White House, really beginning the standards-based movement in this country. We move into the early 90s and into the early 2000s, well, really 90s through Clinton's administration, with attempts to answer some of those concerns. President Clinton's Department of Education made money available through a project known as Goals 2000. That project began to connect some strings to federal money in a way that we hadn't seen before. Notably, though, Clinton tried to institute national standards, but was not able to convince the states to come on board. But by 2001, this effort to connect money to federal priorities really matured in the administration of George W. Bush, and we had NCLB. We still have NCLB. We call it ESEA now. We still have NCLB, and we're still dealing with the connection between test scores and school evaluation, and now through additional requirements, individual teacher evaluation connected to federal monies. So this line that came through, so each of these smiling gentlemen didn't kind of win the prize, but we now have something new that has managed to capture all three of those things: comparisons to students in other countries, national standards that all students across all states can achieve, and then tying the federal money to achievement of those standards and evaluation of schools and teachers. So that's kind of an orthodox policy history of it. There are conspiratorial histories, certainly. But this is the history that we contend with on a daily basis, and I think have been contending with for decades. New Jersey has dealt with its own standards initiatives as well, really beginning in '96 as we moved into the Clinton era of this maturing standards movement. In 1996, New Jersey adopted the core curriculum content standards and promised at that point that they would be revisited and potentially revised every 5 years. Now, those standards were revised and updated several times, and each one of those times was fairly painful for us as a district, some of them more than others, some of them more confusing than others. 2004 was an enormous change. As a social studies teacher at that time, I remember textbooks, resources, everything making a wholesale shift, particularly on our 9th grade level, as we shifted from a sociological and career-oriented study of history and social studies into a much more traditional chronological Western Civ approach. We had, in 2008, updates to English and math standards that caused quite a lot of concern throughout the state. And in 2009, a wholesale update of many other standards in many other areas, including social studies again, business, tech ed, and others. Some of these changes were confusing. The 2008 change in particular, the English standards that year, it's still unclear to us whether we were meant to actually implement those standards or not. The guidance from the state at the time was unsure, and with the 2009 standards following a year after, there would have been no time. They traditionally give us several years to align, no time to align. So all of that to show the national standards movement is quite old, and the state standards have shifted and changed dramatically over the years, going back to '96 when they were really formally adopted. And the testing that came from this, we all recognize. We all recognize, some of us remember the ESPA, the ESPA, remember the NJASC, of course, that's with us still, certainly, the HESPA, the VCT. We had the short-lived Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 end of course exams. So all of the testing for these standards flowed from New Jersey's agreement with the federal government to test our students and evaluate our schools. Everything, however, really changed for us in 2010 with New Jersey joining 43 other states now and several territories and the District of Columbia in adopting the Common Core State Standards. The Common Core State Standards advance really in two major subjects. We have English standards and math standards. Within the English standards, we have literacy standards. We'll talk, Ms. Meckman and Dr. Santoro will talk about all of those with you briefly tonight. In those subjects, the Common Core replaced all of those New Jersey standards that we had gone through during the mid to late 90s and 2000s. So in English and math, those standards were now out of the picture and we had the Common Core. In the other subjects, literacy standards were tacked on to existing New Jersey standards. So for many teachers, this was now an additional number of standards with which to contend. We expect national science standards to come next, and we would not be surprised, based on what we hear, if the State Board of Education were to adopt them as soon as this summer. And we would expect to see some amount of time over which we would be allowed to align authentically, typically with the Common Core. Well, typically it's only happened once. We had roughly 2 years to align. Now, briefly, this effort to develop these Common Core standards flowed from some of the same folks who had been working on those standards that we saw from the Clinton era and later. Chiefly, we have the National Governors Association, and we have the Council of Chief State School Officers. So our education commissioners from around the country worked with governors around the country, worked with business and other private interests around the country, worked with academics to develop these standards. They began, and they did something very different than what had ever been done in New Jersey. They began by making a statement about what we expect students to achieve. So these are the outcomes. We're going to start there. What do we want students to be able to do coming out of 12th grade? And then from there, they worked backwards and created benchmarks along the way from K through 12. So that was the story of that development is a story of spiraling. So from kindergarten up through 12th grade to an end. Staircase is the common metaphor as well, and it's a metaphor that I'll come back to here in a bit. This is very different from what we were used to in New Jersey with our own homegrown standards. But it's a very important and powerful piece for us, particularly as a regional high school district that fits into the middle of a student's, well, jumps into the middle, rather, of a student's educational career and brings it in for a landing. This notion of steps along the way is an important piece for us in our articulation efforts. Now, while the map's up, it's important to mention here, there's been some talk, and a lot of talk recently, about states dropping out of the Common Core. Most notably, and most recently, lots of discussion over New York. New York in particular is a good example, and it brings a finer point to what Mr. Simpson mentioned earlier. States are beginning to voice the difference between the standards and the testing. New York hasn't dropped out of the Common Core. New York has delayed the testing. They've delayed it significantly. They've delayed it until students who are currently in elementary school reach the age of 18. So to get this entire cohort through, rather than drop testing on them in the middle of their career. But they have not They have not disavowed the Common Core standards, and that's an important distinction for us to make. It's a distinction we make every day. The standards and the testing are two different things. To talk briefly about the testing, the federal government, immediately after recognizing the importance of these standards, awarded 2 contracts to 2 separate testing consortia. Smarter Balance, based out of University of California, and PARC, which is run through an organization known as Achieve Incorporated. These, New Jersey ultimately signed on with PARC, although we were a member of both of them for a little while. But we ultimately signed on to PARC and became a governing state in PARC. There are more governing states in PARC than there are members, but that's beside the point. The federal government had to recognize 2, because to recognize 1 would be potentially unconstitutional, education being a right of the states rather than the federal government in our Constitution. The federal government had to present a choice to states. And the third choice has been to develop your own assessments, and we see some states doing that as well. But New Jersey is firmly entrenched at the moment with PARC. These 2 are separate, but they operate very similarly. Often both of their names appear at the top of letterhead, and their websites are eerily similar. But we do see some differences in their timelines. Now, in all of this, and again, thinking back to those 3 presidents who were up there, in this effort, the government, the federal government, gave us an opportunity across the country, gave each state the opportunity to have relaxed NCLB requirements if they adopted the Common Core, signed on to testing of the Common Core, and aligned teacher evaluation to student achievement on those tests. So it's under those 3 requirements that New Jersey is enjoying relaxed NCLB requirements, but plenty of other requirements around all of this. Adopting the standards was something that we didn't think was not going to happen. We fully expected that New Jersey, as these things were developed through 2008 and 2009, that New Jersey would adopt these standards. The testing has been something, again, that we have to look at separately, and part of that is because of the promise within the standards themselves. But more on that in a moment. Our friends in Trenton, the folks who we speak to on an almost daily basis with the Department of Education, are telling us that they are seeing an alignment between, or rather among, federal policy, assessment, student assessment, and teacher evaluation, an alignment of those 3 things that they've never seen. So if you took Reagan, Clinton, and Bush, and you put them together into one conglomerated president of education, you would have this alignment that we're seeing now. And it's uncommon in the entire career of some folks who we deal with in Trenton, folks who've been there for decades. And it reaches directly down into the classroom. Student assessment, the student achievement on these exams that are matched up against the Common Core impacts teacher evaluation directly. But testing, as different from standards, is something that we continue, and I think a lot of districts in New Jersey are continuing to insist on. The standards themselves are something then that we need to talk about. We need to make that case and make folks understand that the standards are different from the testing. And the staircase metaphor is ubiquitous throughout all of this. Many districts describe the Common Core as a staircase. And I did earlier. We have outcomes at the top and steps leading up through K-12. There's even an official video from the authors of the Common Core that has a hand sketching a staircase and using that to illustrate how the standards operate. It's a perfectly apt metaphor. Students following the Common Core, as Ms. Meckman and Dr. Santoro will explain in a moment, are leading up to an outcome. This is a hallmark of the standards. It's a promise of the standards. But in the very introduction of the standards themselves, the standards are claiming to be just a plan for getting to an outcome, a statement of outcomes. It's up to districts and states to build the stairs. So if you can imagine somebody getting a pile of stairs, the risers, the railings, spiral or straight, all of that is up to the individual districts in the vision of the standards. And that was a promise that was made to us, and it's a promise that we took into our strategic plan as we built the standards into that plan. But we have to recognize no matter which staircase you build, if a student misses a step, they are potentially falling through. And that becomes an important element of not just our articulation with our K-8 partners, but also in terms of the 4 years that our students are with us. So at the top of the staircase, we have outcomes, no matter what shape the staircase is in any given school district. Behaviors, skills, knowledge that the standards envision that all students will achieve by the end of their high school careers, all students across the country. To discuss what some of those outcomes look like and how they're structured, I have Ms. Stephanie Mackman and Dr. Nicole Santora here to talk about those outcomes in both English and math. The shifts that those outcomes have asked us to make in our program, both as educators and also as parents, the shifts that we're seeing in our homes, and some specific district responses as well. So I'll turn it over now to Ms. Mackman.
So Dr. Moore brought up this image of staircases, and as a former English teacher, I love imagery. And I am going to come back to this, but I'm going to introduce a new image for you, that of an anchor. Anchors give us stability, they give us a firm foundation. And in English language arts, we have what are called anchor standards in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language as well. There are 10 in each, and these are our foundation for all literacy skills from K through 12. Now, each grade level also has its individual grade-specific standards, and they build one grade to the next to the next. So, for example, in 8th grade, a student has to cite textual evidence, so narrow it down to the smallest common denominator of that standard. Then in the 9th, 10th grade standard, we build on that by saying cite specific and thorough evidence. So we're building complexity there. We're taking that next step up. And then the 11th, 12th grade standard, we're adding on to that yet again by saying, well, where does the text leave things ambiguous? What is unstated in that text? So every year we're expecting different levels of complexity of moving up that staircase. Now in high school, we have 2 grade bands. We have 9, 10, and then 11, 12 standards. And they're broken down even further beyond what's behind me. We have 2 different types of reading standards. We have a set that's for reading literature, fiction, poetry, drama, and then we have a whole other set of 10 for reading informational text, any kind of nonfiction. So we're making the distinction between specific reading skills in those particular areas, as well as varied writing skills, speaking, listening, and language skills. Now, these new standards have brought about shifts for us in the English classroom. The first one is talking about Our first shift is regular practice with complex text, which is not anything new in the English classroom. Trust me, English teachers love giving difficult texts to their students. My former students will attest to this. But this is where you may have heard that term Lexile level before, and it's starting to pop up more and more as Common Core is becoming common parlance. Lexile level is a quantitative measurement of a text's complexity. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but it gives us a way to measure how difficult the text may be for a child. So just like with any other kind of exercise, we have to give students exercises at their own level so they build fluency, so they feel they can do this, they can achieve, while stretching them and pushing them with harder Lexile texts that are just above their reach to push them to go that little bit further. None of us runs faster, lifts anything heavier, or does anything better without challenging ourselves. So this has led us in our revision of English 1, 2, and 3 over the past 2 years to be very, very mindful, even more so than we ever had been in our selection of literature, of giving students texts that are at the appropriate level for their age and maturity, as well as giving them stretch Lexile texts to read that will challenge them and then will force them to grow and push beyond their own comfort level and comfort zone. We can't just let students stay where they are. They'll never improve, and then we're not doing our job as educators. This leads into our next shift, which is evidence-based writing. This is a shift from writing about what you think to writing about what you can prove. So this is something where students have to point to textual evidence from those complex texts that we just talked about, Where can you prove your claim? It's great that you think that, but how can you back that up with proof from a poem, from a novel, from an essay? So the SAT has been doing this for years. Their essay question is just think of something out of thin air. Their questions are things like, should we express our disagreement with authority figures even if there are negative consequences? It's a great question with lots of nuances for students to explore. But when you have no evidence to pull from, no authoritative sources to back up your opinion, what are we teaching you? We failed our students with that. So the new shift, instead of just giving a question and pull something out of the air, is let's give them something to write about. So now let's give them 2 poems, each dealing with, say, the heroic epic figure of Odysseus from Greek mythology. Both authors are dealing with Odysseus in different ways. So you make a claim about what these authors are trying to say about honor in different ways using the same figure. So here a student can still express an opinion, and is still, you're going to have many different shades of gray to explore, but by showing how they can cite that specific and thorough evidence that we were looking for, as well as where the text leaves things ambiguous. So our last shift is one where there's a little bit of confusion. It's this content-rich nonfiction. There's a myth out there that we're getting rid of fiction in English. If that was true, I would not be standing in front of you. Trust me, I love the Odyssey, I love Romeo and Juliet. There's rich lessons to be learned from reading fiction. If we were to hit that 30% requirement of fiction that the Common Core Institute says we achieve with 9th through 12th graders, that would mean that we would have to have 2 English classes a day that did nothing but fiction. And as far as I know, we're not doing that to the schedule, as much as I would love to see that. But this means what this 70% of the day must be spent on nonfiction is that it has to happen outside of the English classroom, but we also have to incorporate it in with our fiction. So we're looking at how we can pair texts. And this is a phrase you might hear over and over again if you start reading some education blogs, pairing texts. So let's start with a poem by Seamus Heaney, Digging. All right, Seamus Heaney is writing about his father and grandfather who were farmers for generations back, and how he is not taking that life, but is looking at his father and grandfather for inspiration. So rather than just working with that poem, let's bring in some rich nonfiction. Let's bring in some nonfiction texts about working class life in America, and some excerpts from these nonfiction books. Let's bring in some media. Let's bring in a painting by Van Gogh of the potato eaters. Let's bring in a photograph by Dorothea Lange of Depression-era workers in the Dust Bowl. Let's look at a TED Talk with Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs and see what are all these texts talking about. So like we talked about that last shift, that evidence-based writing, dealing with multiple texts at the same time. So we're not just dealing with one poem or one novel or one play. Let's deal with a piece of fiction paired with multiple pieces of nonfiction, and let's make a claim using all of these pieces of evidence together. And this is the direction we've been moving in with our English assessments, in what's been going on currently, and as well as with the curriculum revisions, is giving students multiple texts to work with, because that's real life. You don't just deal with one piece of information, one source at a time, but rather how can you juggle all these together and synthesize them, especially in today's age, using multimedia. Now, as we all know, reading and writing just did not just happen in the English classroom. I can't have that content area arrogance and say, I am the only one that teaches reading and writing. Every educator in this room has taught reading and writing, no matter what content you are in. And our anchor standards come back and help us again, and they give us, again, that foundation for other content areas. Those anchor standards branch out into history, science, and the technical subjects, which is basically everything that is not English or math. So every single subject matter is saying you have a legitimate home in the Common Core. So we have 10 specific reading standards for history in the 9, 10, and 11, 12, and 10 specific reading standards for science and the technical subjects. How do you deal with author bias? How do you deal with multiple representations of data qualitatively and quantitatively in these other technical subjects? We also have writing standards, because there is always some form of communication and production of a product in these other subjects. So just as our English language arts uses our anchor standards to give us a foundation in the English classrooms, to give us a foundation in the social studies, the history, the science and technical subject, math has a certain set of organization that works around them. It's not going to be the anchor, but Dr. Nicole Santora is going to help you move through that.
Very good.
Hi, everyone. As Ms. Neckman said, the math standards are composed very differently than the English standards. Even though they were written by the same organization, they went about it in a whole different method. So the math standards are composed of two different categories. The first category is our conceptual standards. Our conceptual standards are the concepts that we've always learned, even with our New Jersey standards. They're the algebra, the geometry, functions, probability, and statistics. In addition to those content standards, we also now have what's called the math practice standards. And in the past, these standards did exist, but we didn't place a lot of emphasis on them. And with the Common Core, we're saying that both the math practice standards and the content standards are equally important. These math practice standards include things like being able to persevere through a problem, being able to attend to precision, being able to justify your answer mathematically, critiquing the work of someone else mathematically. So this new change of the content standards as well as the practice standards has led to 3 shifts in the math education. The first shift is greater focus with fewer topics. So there's a lot of myths out there around the math education, whether you're watching the news or you're on social media, and one of the myths actually has 2 different points of view. You may hear that the Common Core math standards are too rigorous. The reason why people are saying that the Common Core standards are too rigorous is because of this shift. We're spending a lot of time focusing in depth on certain topics. So before, if students needed to find, say, the surface area of a cylinder, we would have them memorize a formula, or we'd give them a formula, and they would just go through the process. Now we want students to have more of an understanding. We want them to understand in a way that stays with them. So we want students not to say, okay, well, here's a formula I have to memorize. We want them to say, oh, well, a cylinder, isn't that just 2 circles and a rectangle? Well, I know the area of those. I've been learning that since 4th grade. So really, I don't need to memorize the surface area of a cylinder. I just need to know what the areas of these simple shapes. So that's what the Common Core is doing on one side. It's letting us dig and get more rigorous. On the other side, you may hear people saying that the Common Core is not rigorous or challenging enough. So you can actually go through social media, and one article says one thing and the other one says the exact opposite. The reason for this is the Common Core gave us standards for 12 years of mathematics. At the high school level, that includes Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and what they call a 4th year of mathematics. This 4th year of mathematics is not as in-depth as we go. It doesn't go as deep as, let's say, pre-calculus. So what we need to remember is that the standards are just that. They're standards. They're not our curriculum. Here at Free Hill Regional, we create our own curriculum, and we're still covering all those wonderful topics of pre-calculus, and we're still having students take calculus and even higher levels of mathematics. So this shift of a greater focus on specific topics has led to these 2 myths about whether they're too challenging or not challenging enough. The second shift is linking topics and thinking across grade levels. The Common Core is designed in a way in which in 1 year we introduce a topic, so students then master it the 2nd year. So for instance, in 8th grade, we spent a lot of time introducing students to linear algebra. The purpose of that is that so when the students go into 9th grade, they then master that topic. After they master linear algebra, the students are then introduced to nonlinear algebra. The purpose of that is so when the students enter Algebra 2, they now have time to master nonlinear algebra. In geometry, what the Common Core did was it incorporated a lot of algebra. So students are now reusing their algebraic skills to solve geometric problems, to prove geometric theorems. So the Common Core is really interested in making sure that we spiral our math education, and it's not something that we teach once and then don't return to again, that it continues with the students. The third shift is all aspects with equal intensity. This is actually my favorite shift. You'll hear tons of rumors on this. They call this the new math. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the new math, and now we have to do 20 steps instead of memorizing one basic algorithm. The point of this shift is they want equal focus on fluency as well as conceptual understanding. So students still have to memorize those basic facts. Students still have to remember their times tables. But they want that to come with conceptual understanding. So in the past, if I said to you, what's 22 times 5? A lot of us would go like this. Or we'd be writing it on paper, right? We would be trying to do it in our heads like this. That's what the Common Core is trying to go away from. They want the students to say, oh, 22 times 5, well, I know 20 times 5 is 100, and I know 2 times 5 is 10. So 22 times 5 is 110. So as you can see, it took me more steps than that basic algorithm, but I was able to do it a lot quicker and fluency and mentally. And I didn't have to do it on my imaginary whiteboard. So that's what this shift is all about. It's combining that conceptual understanding with fluency so students have the ability to truly master mathematics and have that number sense to proceed. So these three shifts obviously had to make a lot of changes in our curriculum and instruction. And here at Freehold Regional, we took a few steps to make sure that we addressed them. Last year, we rewrote our geometry curriculum. We made sure that the geometry curriculum included both the practice standards as well as the content. And then this year, we had implementation sessions in which teachers collaborated and shared ideas how to address these shifts to the best of their ability. We also, this year now, rewrote the Algebra 1 and the Algebra 2 curriculum, and next year we will also be holding this implementation sessions. We also have what's called assessment builders. Groups of teachers meet with the academic supervisors who provide them with professional development on the standards and the shifts, and then these teachers work collaboratively to create assessments that hit multiple standards in one problem and include both the practice standards as well as the content standards. One of the last things that we did in conjunction with the academic supervisors was we created a blog. And every month since November, one of our mathematics practice standards are highlighted. And on this blog, you can see the definition of the practice standard. You can see what it looks like in the classroom, sample problems of what it would look like on an assessment, and also what it looks like at home. So if you see your child, let's say, struggling through a problem, you understand that we're focusing on the perseverance and trying to get through the problem regardless of any obstacles that come into your way. And you know what that looks like at home as well.
Normally this would be the end, but there's a little bit more to talk about. We're almost done. We're bringing it for a landing soon, but you can see this. We just released one of those posts today, as a matter of fact. Today was our monthly blog post. If you hit us on Twitter, you can see those announcements as they come through, and it'll link to. It's also, if you're on our Facebook page, they're coming through as well there. But from the curriculum page on the website, you can also reach those entries on our blog. But if I could stop with just the standards at this point, I would, and then this would be the end of the presentation. But I have to discuss a bit more to bring it back to that testing again. To remember to be very careful to separate the testing from this information about the standards that you've just heard. This discussion around the Common Core has not been so careful to make that distinction, although it is becoming more and more careful and more sophisticated. As Mr. Sanson mentioned in the introduction, we have completed participation in field testing. We were rather pleasantly surprised with the prompts and the problems that we saw on those tests. Technological or other issues aside, little bumps in the road, generally a positive experience for us. But the prompts themselves were good test prompts. We were pleased with those. What we don't know, and I guess we have to recognize now, nothing was at stake for us during this pilot field testing. We don't know. We still don't know. There still is not solid guidance on when exactly our students will be held accountable for graduation purposes on these tests, and when or if departments of education will be able to figure out how to bring those test scores to the evaluation of our teachers. Currently, high school teachers aren't subject to that. There's a bit to say about the testing and the vision for the testing. I'm going to let Dr. Santora fill you in very quickly on the vision for the administration of CLARK.
So CLARK has three main aspects of its vision. The first is that it's aligned to the Common Core, that it focuses on critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and it provides you with a student readiness for college and careers matrix and score to see how prepared students are for college and careers. The test itself is an interactive computer-based test. It's very different than in the past with the multiple choices. In English, students may be actually dragging sentences and paragraphs. In math, they may be actually measuring angles with a protractor. It's administered in grades 3 through 11, and at the high school level, it's course-based, which means there's a test for English 1, English 2, English 3, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And it's only administered in English and mathematics. It's composed of 4 separate assessments. The first 2 assessments are optional. They're meant to formatively assess how students are progressing throughout the year. So we don't have to give them, it's an option, and they're just measuring our students' progress. The next two assessments are mandatory, and they're both summative. The first one will happen between February and March, and it's performance-based. So in language arts, it may look like what Ms. Meckman was talking about. Students may have to read multiple passages, watch a video, and then write an essay in which they use site-based evidence to support their viewpoints. In mathematics, they're going to be prompted with a real-world problem that incorporates many standards and has multiple steps, and they're going to have to work through each step in order to derive an answer. The last, or the 4th assessment, is an end-of-year summative assessment. That test is more of the traditional test that students are used to taking. It tests students' concepts and skills.
So just to be very clear again about some of the concerns around the testing and some of the concern we have about ensuring that the promise of the standard is fulfilled in that we can develop our curriculum, own it, and make decisions. But we do frankly have some worries about the testing. And I think folks across the country in our profession share in some of these concerns. We worry that the testing would strip us of that freedom that the standards have so strongly promised in their text, that these assessments would tell us which standards to teach, when, and how. And again, violating the promise there of our being able to design that staircase. We worry about tenuous links between those test results and teacher evaluation. And the jury of researchers is frankly still out on the validity of growth percentiles and other metrics for attempting to connect test scores to teacher effectiveness, particularly on the high school level, where, as we mentioned earlier, students learn those topics in multiple classrooms. So various teachers are responsible for student growth, certainly. And one of the intents of testing, and as Dr. Santor mentioned, a college and career readiness matrix. Would that become a cut line that is drawn for students as early as 3rd grade? And our efforts here to reduce barriers for students to pursue their passions in rigorous coursework and rigorous experiences. Would students be arriving here at our shores in 9th grade so thoroughly tracked by these tests that it would be impossible for us to undo what's been done there? Would this become a sorting mechanism that takes effect at much younger grades than we see now with this testing? And that's a nightmare scenario, but it is a real nightmare that we actually have. And we have been building our AP Bridge, our summer academy with original credit, other opportunities to address all of the objectives in our strategic plan to increase equity of access, and we hope those would continue to serve us. But we also worry about the impact of the testing there. So we insist then, as we opened, we insist on implementing these standards as they were sold to us as a vision for common outcomes, ambitious outcomes, but common outcomes for college and career readiness. Here, we have our strategic plan that has already made statements, and one of the wisest things, and we've always said this about our planning process, one of the wisest things I think we did was build fulfillment of these mandates into our plan so that our plan was not derailed by these mandates. So common core alignment, teacher evaluation, all of those things are right in our plan. And as a result of that, we pursue all of those mandates again through the objectives that we in our community declared through that plan. These objectives are part of the work that we do to achieve our mission, so as we pursue those standards, we're doing it through these lenses that we have ground. And our mission statement that those objectives flow into is, in many ways, a statement of college and career readiness that we hold to dearly and that we keep in the center of our efforts to implement these standards. It is with that, and again with the reminder of the standards as separate from tests, the standards as something that we own through the promises that the standards have made about their flexibility, but also through the objectives and mission that we've declared, that we move forward to implement them, and through the talents of all of the teachers, administrators, and supervisors, that we continue to push forward. And frankly, as we deal with other districts, find day in and day out that where other districts are struggling, we are having meaningful dialogue. Where other districts are bewildered, we are unpacking, and we're very pleased with where we are in the implementation of these standards. So I thank you for this time and this opportunity to update you, and we'll take any questions at all that you have.
That's great.
Thank you.
Any questions from any members of the board? Everybody got all of that? So thank you, Dr. Moore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Stephanie. I think anyone who is dealing with this on the parental end sees sort of the change, and as an individual who was not necessarily overly mathematically inclined, when I sit down with my third grade daughter and see how they're conceptually teaching math, it's fundamentally different than how we learned mathematics. So I think it's overwhelming. I think it could be alarming to parents who may struggle to help their students with their work based on how they're learning it, and then you throw in all of the jargon that just loves to pile on, and it becomes even more alarming. And so I think that complexity can really lose some folks in the process. We are trying to streamline this and simplify it for folks, and if you go online and look at the blog, and it has each standard broken down with a clear explanation of what the standard is talking about, an example of how it plays out. It's really informative in a much more simplified manner than just looking at the scope of all the standards together. And I think parents will certainly appreciate that. And that ability to help their children navigate this process as well. We've said it a million times here. The standards are not to be confused with the testing that accompanies it. They're two distinct items that are interwoven and interrelated. I hope, I think we're all hopeful that we'll be able to manage that process, and the testing will not subsume the standards. But that is the concern, and we'll see how the state proceeds in that manner. Regardless, I think we'll equip our students fully to navigate whatever direction the state mandates that we head. Just one note before we move on to some other to committee updates. We also, last Monday, a number of folks attended the Innovation in Special Education Award Ceremony sponsored by New Jersey School Boards Association in Princeton. And it's the third year in a row that the Freehold Regional High School District has been recognized at the state level from school boards for a program that we have in the district. This time around, it was for the workplace training program that we have at Freehold Township High School. It was recognized as one of 9 innovating programs across the state. It was a terrific honor. We had students and parents also attend that celebration. A lot of hard work from folks that are involved with the workplace training program. But again, a innovative model program recognized at the state level 3 years in a row. We'll go for 4, right, Ms. Tomasi? And I think it's just another feather in the cap of the district. So,
thank you. Before we go on, I'd like to thank Dr. Moore, his team, Shana, for that really excellent presentation. I know it was a lot of work. We appreciate it. Okay, next we have board reports, curriculum and instruction.
I had a 3-hour commute, so it's all Michael.
I have a great response to that, but I'm not going to say it. Okay. We spent most of the meeting this evening talking about the Marzano model for teacher evaluation and really learned how, in addition to evaluation, it also impacts teaching in the classroom. And we also discussed that there were different evaluation models that were put out there, and the advisory council of this district was directed by the state to select one, which the Marzano model was the choice that was used. And there's a lot of room for districts to implement it within our own parameters. We used the tenets of the model to evaluate teachers. We also discussed the classroom strategies and behaviors that teachers are evaluated on. Now, only some of the models been implemented this school year, and there's actually 60 elements a teacher can be evaluated on. And this is actually all done on an online system. So who's ever observing the teacher has the option, and most do, of sitting in the classroom observing the teacher with their tablet computer. Some old school people, I guess, just want to take notes and, input it later. But, and just these classroom evaluations, and I think we've discussed this before, done by the building principals, vice principals, administrative supervisors, SECAs, and assistant principals. What we also looked at was really zooming in on the dominant elements of this evaluation model. And that is really going away from the narrative elements that maybe used to exist in an evaluation model, where who was ever observing the teacher would just write down all their observations. And now it's a whole different model where, as a matter of fact, nobody could see this, but if you look on this piece of paper, you can see there's all these different standards that are being used. So the whole system of the classroom observations really accounts for 85% of the teacher's evaluation, and the other 15% comes from student growth objectives. The acronym for that is SGOs, and those are developed by the teacher and the supervisor. That was really what we talked about with respect to the evaluation model, and then we just summed it up in about 30 seconds, getting an update on the IB program. Right now it's a little bit dormant. We're in the situation now where we haven't gotten any news from the International Baccalaureate Organization. They are on schedule to be coming into Freehold Township High School for their visit in the fall. But just to remind everybody, it's a 2-year process of authorization. So everything is on schedule with respect to that. And that's what transpired.
Thank you, Michael. Policy?
Policy met early last week. We had a number of folks who had conflicts at the last minute, so I'll give the report. There are several policies that are up for the first read this evening. Some real basic mandated items around number of board members, a policy around the number of board and the years on the terms that they serve, domestic violence, general policies around the employment of teaching staff members and support staff members. I should note that those policies had a slight correction on them related to expanding the statement around on student grounds and on school grounds and school-sponsored events, which was some of the feedback. We had uploaded the wrong updated policies and changed that this morning, so there was slight wording from what the board is formally adopting on that. Everything else remains the same. And a mandated policy around the professional development for teachers and school leaders as well.
Thank you. Doing double duty, Michael, Finance Committee.
Actually, this will be much easier because we haven't had a meeting since our last full board meeting, but we have one next Tuesday. The day after Memorial Day is our next meeting.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next up is public participation.
Oh, before we do, for the agenda. Which is the comment center. So just a couple changes to the agenda. In the back of the room, there was an addendum looks like this on the yellow piece of paper. An additional addendum, which would be noted as G15, reads, resolved that upon recommendation of the superintendent of schools, determination of employee number 8569 be approved effective Tuesday, May 27th, 2014. And finally, some amendments on G3 resolution, which is the approval of appointments and reappointments. Stephanie Penzak changed the dates to May 2nd, 2014 through June 3rd, 2014. And on G12, which is the approval of substitute home instruction personnel, Vanessa Cava changed the effective date to May 6th, 2014. So with those amendments.
And Mr. Boyce, just one other quick item. For the memorandum of agreement that is being considered under item G14, there was an inadvertent typographical mistake that was corrected by the parties at the table. On page 4, number 18 will read, all earned vacation time may be taken at any time during the calendar year, provided that school is not scheduled to open and provided they receive managerial approval. It was listed as is no scheduled, so it's not scheduled.
I thought that was just slang. Oh. All right, now we come to public participation. We have two names. Vince? Scotty?
Vince Scott, I guess mine is a mathematical question or questions having to do with budget or I guess more specifically the tax funding in support of the budget. And one question would be, do we have any sending, receiving students that attend our school right now?
Very few. I don't know off the top of my head, but we may have one or two.
Can I ask what kind of fee the sending unit pays for that student?
It depends on what the program they're involved in. So if it's a special education program, it's calculated differently than regular education. Okay, I don't have that with me, and like I said, it's very limited amount. In fact, we don't admit any regular education students at all.
So we don't have any regular...
No regular education.
That are sent that we receive from other districts now.
So the other question relates to the resultant distribution of the funding, where it comes from, and the different municipalities that participate in the region. And it's been growing over the years, but this year it really stand out very between Close Neck and a number of others. The other Extreme End, for example, if you were to calculate the per pupil tax levy based on the number of pupils that we're sending, that each entity is sending, and the amount of money that they're paying in the tax levy to that same party, the numbers are astronomical apart. I mean, Close Neck comes in at over $26,000 a student, and Freehold Borough comes in, based on the schedule you gave me, at something like $5,900 a student. Now, I can accept that there may be some disparity and some differences based on some adjustment, but I think mathematically speaking, the basic formula should be looked at.
Well, so there's a couple points that we agree with you. And Mr. Boyce, if I wade into waters that I shouldn't wade into, please correct me. But that formula is established by the state. And what Colts Neck has that is not working well in Colts Neck, in particular in the way that that formula is interpreted, is they have a drastically declining elementary enrollment and a stable high school enrollment. So the burden is disproportionately shifted to the high school taxes, but the formula itself is mandated by the state. That's not a local decision.
If this formula were to be addressed for revisiting it and changing it, how would one go about doing that? Where does that start? Is it initiated by this board?
State legislature.
State.
Yeah.
Initiated at the state?
Yeah.
Because if my memory serves me correctly, going back a dozen or more years when the formula was established, wasn't there one of the, Alfred, I think, filed suit in order to get
That was the
this
voting.
formula put in place, and it had a number of
The waiting.
areas that, by today's standards, would seem out of whack for what the reality is.
I'm not sure if that was the school funding.
That was the voting.
Right, that was the
That was the
proportional voting.
Our voting weight on the
Voting.
I guess, as a citizen of the region, which, by the way, I have to pronounce, this is, I think, the largest region of this type, and the grades and the job that we get to do is phenomenal. Just cost coastline to which one?
But you know what?
Compared to, we want to pay our fair share.
I think you might be lucky in one respect and one respect only, because as Mr. Sampson said, any change has to come from the state legislature, and you're fortunate in that Caroline Casagran, who's an assemblywoman, actually lives in Colts Neck, so she's suffering along with everybody else. And no, but what I'm saying is that is really where we should start.
Yeah, that's
Because-
what we spokesman for you.
After I saw this guy was very responsible sending information that I was able to use to compute all of these things mathematically. Then I reached out to all of our legislators, and certainly, I know Carolyn Casper, and I actually sent a letter to our Senator Beck, and then I sent a similar thing in the standard form to their office, all three, to their office in Freehold. I didn't get an acknowledgement. It was disappointing. The only person who reacted, and reacted promptly, was sitting right there. So today I reached out to the State Education Commissioner's office. They asked if, just wanted to inquire if someone was going to be attending this meeting, someone representing that office tonight. I didn't even get an acknowledgement from that one. But I'm trying to identify where to get our arms around and to get started on addressing this gross inequity. There's going to be some townships that are not going to be too happy about a change like that, but if you were to normalize it based on the total number of students who were sent to the regional system and the total amount of tax levy required, it comes out to like less than $11,000 per student. If you multiply that times 519 students that we're sending, it's a lot different than $25,000 a student times 519. Big number. In the model that CoastLink used this year in their preliminary budget analysis, they use an $800,000 assessed goal in that model. If the budget were normalized, as I had suggested, that, it's one way to do it, where everybody paid an equal pro pupil tax levy, there would be $2,000 a year savings per homeowner. That's not chump change. We're talking about significant money. Now, this is not an anomaly that just happened this year either. We're familiar with the fact that this is a situation that has prevailed for some time, as I'm sure Ms. Costello is firmly aware of. So the time to address it is now. If this formula has gross inequities built into it, let's readdress it. And I need to know, can someone point me in the right direction? When I say the state, do I go to the state commissioner's office? Is that where I would go?
I think you went to the right offices initially. You have to start with your local legislatures. The legislators. That's the first step.
Legislative office. Is there anybody here who I could contact and keep abreast of what I'm doing and sort of?
Sure, me. Absolutely. But well, why not? This is a very politicized issue across the state, and there's a reason that there hasn't been movement on it for a number of years, and it's been interpreted a bit differently under the present governor. So it's a lightning rod issue, So folks are not necessarily jumping in to touch it, and I think that's
Yeah.
I agree, and, you know, it's been suggested when you know, I've had past relations, with both Carolyn and Senator Beck. And I found them to be very straightforward, you know, and the suggestion that it would be politically incorrect for them to address this because some of the voters come from some of the towns who would be adversely affected by getting an increase in their tax rate. I really find it difficult to believe that over that, but they are politicians.
well, it's a tough. I mean, it's a tough situation because there are winners and losers, and if you shift it, then there are different winners and losers in the interpretation.
Everybody's a winner with the region that we have here. One of the basic purposes of setting up this like a merge with different companies to form a more productive and versatile corporation where the cost was shared equally. That aspect of it obviously is not reflected. The productivity aspect of it certainly worked out very well.
Well, within the bucket, the overall efficiency is in play. When you compare us to the 31 other regionals, we're the most efficient financially.
Or what we get for the money paid,
The distribution is.
just how it should
Yeah.
be. So I really appreciate the opportunity to say anything. I'm going to follow up with our legislators, local legislators, and keep you abreast of it.
Sure.
We change the weight of our vote.
Either way, yeah, Stuart. Mr. Sampson, yeah.
Carl?
Yes.
I think maybe we should have Vince let Senator Beck know that we've already had dealings with them.
Yes, well, actually, a few days ago, I contacted Mrs. Casagran myself, and I left my two phone numbers, my cell and my home number, and I'm awaiting a call back. And we also, Chuck, Sean, and me went to see the mayor of Colts Neck and Jim Schatzel to discuss these very issues about as soon as the proposed increases came about. So the superintendent was right on top of this and right alongside of me. And I think your comments are very good, and I'm happy that you brought them to the attention of the board, and I think more people should do that because I too am affected by it and very much concerned, and you're right in saying that. So thank you.
Actually, I spoke today with, right now, you know how to maybe now, right now.
Yes.
We had a long conversations today about this, and certainly he would like to address it, but none of us know really where to start precisely. He doesn't want to go spending township money and spinning wheels, you know, if we don't have a course of action that is appropriate. In fact, that was my closing comment in my letter, email to our legislators. Please advise me on the appropriate course of action. I mean, they're disappointed, very disappointed.
Mr.
I'm
Moses,
surprised
can I
because
just
they
add
usually
to
answer promptly. I'm surprised because I also know Carolyn Casagrande and Jennifer Beck, and I'm surprised because they usually do respond quickly to anything. So I'm going to see if I can reach out to them on this also.
Mr. Moses, just another, I think any formula is going to be imperfect in one way or another, and certainly you've eloquently pointed out one aspect of it, but there are other aspects of this formula that I think are more readily addressable, and that is that there's an abruptness to this formula from year to year, where it is overly sensitive to changes in either enrollment or equalized value from a stability point of view. from a municipality to municipality point of view. Those are things that can certainly be part of an overall solution as well. So I think there's a few different angles to look at this from and talk about alternatives with.
And I know Mr. Boyce has actually proposed different models, like 3-year models. He's actually brought it to some folks' attention to take a look at different models that mitigate that variability. So,
This how much money we need to raise from tax levy? These are how many students we have. Bingo, you never know. What could be carrying that?
Thank you. Next up, we have Rick.
Worst is when you
Yeah,
think
I'm
nothing.
going to be very brief. I'm a friend of the businesses, and I've lived in Cold Snack for over 30 years, and I've had my children go through the district school system. Of course, we didn't have Cold Snack at that time, so they all went to Marlboro. But as a Princeton alumni, I get the opportunity to interview a lot of great high school seniors that are applying to Princeton. And a number of them, of course, come from the district. And I can see the quality, represented by the district program. And very often, the kind of comments I get from these students, and these are exceptional students, they laud the teachers. The teachers are role models. They generally have a couple that, caught fire their imagination. And that's what's going to propel somebody who has the capability into another orbit. And these kids are dynamite. So I see that from the district. As Vince said, I think that we're a very competitive district. And we're not challenging, the cost structure. It seems like throughout, not only the teachers, but the administration, the facilities, the apportionments within the management of the district are well done. So the value is clearly there. I think what we're focusing on is cost-value relationships. And back to what Vince is saying, you can answer the question that the state has basically mandated this equalized value as a starting point. That's like saying if somebody is going to go into the store and say there's a special on an appliance, the first thing the clerk asks you is, what's your net worth? Because we have a special, modifier for you. Oh, you come from this zip code, the modifier is 0.2 times our sales price. It doesn't make any sense. So, the other thing is that within the formula, there is a modifier related to the percent of students within that township that are going to high school. So you're getting into per pupil. You're moving from net worth of the township to per pupil costs. So it's an apples and oranges formula. And my question to you is, has the whole formula been mandated by the state, or has it been modifications that were done along the way that were not state mandated?
To the best of my knowledge, the entire thing, in its entirety, is imposed by the state.
And just loves to pile on, and it becomes even more alarming. And so I think that complexity can really lose some folks in the process. We are trying to streamline this and simplify it for folks. And if you go online and look at the blog, and it has each standard broken down with a clear explanation of what the standard is talking about, an example of how it plays out. It's really informative in a much more simplified manner than just looking at the scope of all the standards together. And I think parents will certainly appreciate that and that ability to help their children navigate this process as well. We've said it a million times here. The standards are not to be confused with the testing that accompanies it. They're two distinct items that are interwoven and interrelated. I hope, I think we're all hopeful that we'll be able to manage that process, and the testing will not subsume the standards. But that is the concern, and we'll see how the state proceeds in that manner. Regardless, I think we'll equip our students fully to navigate whatever direction the state mandates that we head. Just one note before we move on to some other to committee updates. We also last Monday a number of folks attended the Innovation in Special Education Award Ceremony sponsored by New Jersey School Boards Association in Princeton, and it's the third year in a row that the Freehold Regional High School District has been recognized at the state level from school boards for a program that we have in the district. This time around it was for the workplace training program that we have at Freehold Township High School. It was recognized as one of 9 innovating programs across the state. It was a terrific honor. We had students and parents also attend that celebration. A lot of hard work from folks that are involved with the workplace training program. But again, a innovative model program recognized at the state level 3 years in a row. We'll go for 4, right, Ms. Tomasi? And I think it's just another feather in the cap of the district. So.
Before we go on, I'd like to thank Dr. Moore, his team, Shana, for that really excellent presentation. I know it was a lot of work. I appreciate it. Okay, next we have board reports, curriculum and instruction.
I had a 3-hour commute, so that's all my hopes.
I have a great response to that, but I'm not going to say it. Okay. We spent most of the meeting this evening talking about the Marzano model for teacher evaluation, and really learned how, in addition to evaluation, it also impacts teaching in the classroom. And we also discussed that there were different evaluation models that were put out there, and the advisory council of this district was directed by the state to select one, which the Marzano model was the choice that was used. And there's a lot of room for districts to implement it within our own parameters. We use the tenets of the model to evaluate teachers. We also discussed the classroom strategies and behaviors that teachers are evaluated on. Now, only some of the models been implemented this school year, and there's actually 60 elements a teacher can be evaluated on. And this is actually all done on an online system. So who's ever observing the teacher would, has the option, and most do, of sitting in the classroom observing the teacher with their tablet computer. Some old school people, I guess, just want to take notes and, input it later. But, and just these classroom evaluations, and I think we've discussed this before, done by the building principals, vice principals, administrative supervisors, SECAs, and assistant principals. What we also looked at was really zooming in on the dominant elements of this evaluation model. And that is really going away from the narrative elements that maybe used to exist in an evaluation model, where who was ever observing the teacher would just write down all their observations. And now it's a whole different model where, as a matter of fact, nobody could see this, but if you look on this piece of paper, you can see there's all these different standards that are being used. So the whole system of the classroom observations really accounts for 85% of the teacher's evaluation, and the other 15% comes from student growth objectives. The acronym for that is SGOs, and those are developed by the teacher and the supervisor. That was really what we talked about with respect to the evaluation model, and then we just summed it up in about 30 seconds, getting an update on the IB program. Right now it's a little bit dormant. We're in the situation now where we haven't gotten any news from the International Baccalaureate Organization. They are on schedule to be coming into Freehold Township High School for their visit in the fall. But just to remind everybody, it's a 2-year process of authorization. So everything is on schedule with respect to that. And that's what you're inspired.
Thank you, Michael. Policy?
Policy met early last week. We had a number of folks who had conflicts at the last minute, so I'll give the report. There are several policies that are up for the first read this evening. Some real basic mandated items around number of board members, a policy around the number of board and the years on the terms that they serve, domestic violence, general policies around the employment of teaching staff members and support staff members. I should note that those policies had a slight correction on them related to expanding the statement around on student grounds and on school grounds and school-sponsored events, which was some of the feedback. We had uploaded the wrong updated policies and changed that this morning, so there was slight wording from what the board is formally adopting on that. Everything else remains the same. And a mandated policy around the professional development for teachers and school leaders as well.
Thank you. Doing double duty, Michael, Finance Committee?
Actually, this will be much easier because we haven't had a meeting since our last full board meeting, but we have one next Tuesday. The day after Memorial Day is our next meeting.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next up is public participation.
Oh, before we do, for the agenda, which is the comment. Right. So just a couple changes to the agenda. In the back of the room, there was an addendum. Looks like this on the yellow piece of paper. An additional addendum, which would be noted as G15, reads, resolved that upon recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the termination of employee number 8569 be approved effective Tuesday, May 27th, 2014. And finally, some amendments on G3 resolution, which is the approval of appointments and reappointments. Stephanie Penzak changed the dates to May 2nd, 2014 through June 3rd, 2014. And on G12, which is the approval of substitute home instruction personnel, Vanessa Cava changed the effective date to May 6th, 2014. So with those amendments.
And Mr. Boyce, just one other quick item. For the memorandum of agreement that is being considered under item G14, it was an inadvertent typographical mistake that was corrected by the parties at the table. On page 4, number 18 will read, all earned vacation time may be taken at any time during the calendar year, provided that school is not scheduled to open and provided they receive managerial approval. It was listed as is no scheduled, so it's not scheduled.
I thought that was just slang. Oh. All right, now we come to public participation. We have two names. Vince? Scotty?
Vince Scotty. Folks, I guess mine is a mathematical question or questions having to do with budget or I guess more specifically the tax funding in support of the budget. And one question would be, do we have any sending, receiving students that attend our school right now?
Very few. I don't know off the top of my head, but we may have one or two.
Can I ask what kind of fee the sending unit pays for that student?
It depends on what the program they're involved in. So if it's a special education program, it's calculated differently than regular education. Okay, I don't have that with me, and like I said, it's very limited amount. In fact, we don't admit any regular education students at all.
Oh, so we don't have any regular.
No regular education.
That are sent that we receive from other districts now.
So the other question relates to the resultant distribution of the funding. You know where it comes from, and the different municipalities that participate in the region. And it's been growing over the years, but this year it really seems to stand out very between Cold Snake and a number of others, and the other extreme end, for example, if you were to calculate the per pupil tax levy based on the number of pupils that we're sending, that each entity is sending, and the amount of money that they're paying in the tax levy to that same party, the numbers are astronomical apart. I mean, Cold Snake comes in at over $26,000 a student, and Freehold Borough comes in, based on the schedule you gave me, at something like $5,900 a student. Now, I can accept that there may be some disparity and some differences that based on some adjustment, but I think mathematically speaking, the basic formula should be looked at.
Well, so there's a couple points that we agree with you. And Mr. Boyce, if I wade into waters that I shouldn't wade into, please correct me. But that formula is established by the state. And what Colts Neck has that is not working well in Colts Neck, in particular in the way that that formula is interpreted, is they have a drastically declining elementary enrollment and a stable high school enrollment. So the burden is disproportionately shifted to the high school taxes, but the formula itself is mandated by the state. That's not a local decision.
If this formula were to be addressed for revisiting it and changing it, how would one go about doing that? Where does that start? Is it initiated by this board?
No, state legislature.
By the state.
State.
It has to
Yeah.
be initiated at the state level?
Yeah.
Because if my memory serves me correctly, going back a dozen or more years when the formula was established, wasn't there one of the filed suit in order to get this formula put in place, and it had a number of
The weighting.
variants that, by today's standards, would seem out of whack for what the reality is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the school funding.
That was the voting.
Right, that was the proportional voting.
Our voting weight on the
voting.
I guess, as a citizen of the region, which, by the way, I have to pronounce, this is, I think, the largest region of this type, and the grades and the job that we have to do is phenomenal. Just cost closely to which one.
But you know what?
Compared to, we want to pay our fair share.
I think you might be lucky in one respect and one respect only, because as Mr. Sampson said, any change has to come from the state legislature, and you're fortunate in that Caroline Casagran, who's an assemblywoman, actually lives in Colts Neck, so she's suffering along with everybody else. And no, but what I'm saying is that is really where we should start.
Yeah, that's
Because-
what she's a good spokesman for you.
After I talked at Sean Descagnon, was very responsible sending information that I was able to use to compute all of these things mathematically. Then I reached out to all of our legislators, and certainly, I know Carol Cassavetes, and I actually sent a letter to our Senator Beck, and then I sent a similar thing in the standard form to their office, all three, to their office in Freehold. I didn't get an acknowledgement. It was disappointing. The only person who reacted, and reacted promptly, was sitting right there. So today I reached out to the State Education Commissioner's office. A little late, asked if, just wanted to inquire if someone was going to be attending this meeting, someone representing that office tonight. I didn't get an acknowledgement from that one. But I'm trying to identify where to get our arms around and to get started on addressing this gross inequity. There's going to be some townships that are not going to be too happy about a change like that, but if you were to normalize it based on the total number of students being sent to the regional system and the total amount of tax levy required, it comes out to like less than $11,000 per student. If you multiply that times 519 students that we're sending, it's a lot different than $25,000 a student times 519. Big number. In the model that Coast Neck uses, used this year in their preliminary budget analysis. They used an $800,000 assessed goal in that model. If the budget were normalized, as I have suggested, that, it's one way to do it, where everybody paid an equal pro pupil tax levy, there would be $2,000 a year savings per homeowner. That's not Trump change. We're talking about significant money. Now, this is not an anomaly that just happened this year either. We're familiar with the fact that this is a situation that has prevailed for some time, as I'm sure as television is firmly aware of. So the time to address it is now. If this formula has gross inequities built into it, let's readdress it. And I need to know, can someone point me in the right direction? When I say the state, do I go through the state commissioner's office? Is that where I would go?
I think you went to the right offices initially. You have to start with your local legislatures. The legislators. That's the first step.
Legislative office. Is there anybody here who I could contact and keep abreast of what I'm doing and sort of?
Sure, me. Absolutely. But well, why not? This is a very politicized issue across the state, and there's a reason that there hasn't been movement on it for a number of years, and it's been interpreted a bit differently under the present governor. So it's a lightning rod issue. So folks are not necessarily jumping in to touch it, and I think that's
I agree. And it's suggested when I've had past relations, experiences with both Carolyn and Senator Beck, and I found them to be very straightforward. And the suggestion that it would be politically incorrect for them to address this because some of the voters come from some of the towns who would be adversely affected by getting an increase in their tax rate. I really find it difficult to believe that of that, but they are politicians.
Well, it's a tough. It's a tough situation because there are winners and losers, and if you shift it, then there are different winners and losers in the interpretation.
Everybody is a winner with the region that we have here. One of the basic purposes of setting up this type of merger of different companies to form a more productive and versatile corporation where the cost was shared equally. That aspect of it obviously is not in place. The productivity aspect of it certainly worked out very well.
Well, within the bucket, the overall efficiency is in play. When you compare us to the 31 other regionals, we're the most efficient financially.
Or what we get for the money paid,
The distribution is.
just how it should
Yeah.
be. So I really appreciate the opportunity to say anything. I'm going to follow up with our legislators, local legislators, and keep you abreast of it.
Sure.
We change the weight of our vote.
Either way, yeah, Stuart Moss. Mr. Sampson, yeah.
Carl?
Yes.
I think maybe we should have
Carolyn.
Vince let Senator Beck know that we've already had dealings with that.
Yes, well, actually, a few days ago, I contacted Mrs. Casagran myself, and I left my two phone numbers, my cell and my home number, and I'm awaiting a call back. And we also, Chuck, Sean, and me, went to see the mayor of Colts Neck and Jim Schatzel to discuss these very issues about as soon as the proposed increases came about. So the superintendent was right on top of this and right alongside of me. And I think your comments are very good, and I'm happy that you brought them to the attention of the board, and I think more people should do that because I too am affected by it and very much concerned, and you're right in saying that. So thank you.
I spoke to
Yes.
We had a long conversation today about this, and certainly he would like to address it, but none of us know really where to start precisely, and he doesn't want to go spending township money and spinning wheels, if we don't have a course of action that is appropriate. In fact, that was my closing comment in my letter, email to our legislators. Please advise me on the appropriate course of action. I mean, we got to acknowledge, they're disappointed, very disappointed.
Mr. Moses, can I just
They
add
usually
to-
answer promptly. I'm surprised because I also know Carolyn Casagrande and Jennifer Beck, and I'm surprised because they usually do respond quickly to anything. So I'm going to see if I can reach out to them on this also.
Mr. Moses, just another, I think any formula is going to be imperfect in one way or another, and certainly you've eloquently pointed out one aspect of it, but there are other aspects of this formula that I think are more readily addressable, and that is that there's an abruptness to this formula from year to year, where it is overly sensitive to changes in either enrollment or equalized value from a stability point of view, from a municipality to municipality point of view. Those are things that can certainly be part of an overall solution as well. So I think there's a few different angles to look at this from and talk about alternatives with.
And I know Mr. Boyce has actually proposed different models, like 3-year models. He's actually brought it to some folks' attention to take a look at different models that mitigate that variability. So,
This is how much money we need to raise the tax levy. These are all the students we have. Bingo, we have enough. What could be fairer than that?
Thank you. Next up, we have Rick.
Where's his way?
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief. I'm a friend of Vince's, and I've lived in Colts Neck for over 30 years, and I've had my children go through the district school system. Of course, we didn't have Colts Neck at that time, so they all went to Marlboro. But as a Princeton alumni, I get the opportunity to interview a lot of great high school seniors that are applying to Princeton. And a number of them, of course, come from the district. And I can see the quality, represented by the district program. And very often the kind of comments I get from these students, and these are exceptional students, they laud the teachers. The teachers are role models. They generally have a couple that, caught and fired their imagination. And that's what's going to propel somebody who has the capability into another orbit. And these kids are dynamite. So I see that from the district. As Vince said, I think that we're a very competitive district. And we're not challenging, the cost structure. It seems like throughout, not only the teachers, but the administration, the facilities, the apportionments within the management of the district are well done. So the value is clearly there. I think what we're focusing on is cost-value relationships. And back to what Vince is saying, you can answer the question that the state has basically mandated this equalized value as a starting point. That's like saying if somebody is going to go into the store and say there's a special on an appliance, the first thing the clerk asks you is, what's your net worth? Because we have a special, modifier for you. Oh, you come from this zip code, the modifier is 2.2 times our sales price. It doesn't make any sense. So, the other thing is that within the formula, there is a modifier related to the percent of students within that township that are going to high school. So you're getting into per pupil. You're moving from, net worth of the township to per pupil costs. So it's an apples and oranges formula. My question to you is, has the whole formula been mandated by the state, or has it been modifications that were done along the way that were not state mandated?
To the best of my knowledge, the entire thing, in its entirety, is imposed by the state.
This is uniform throughout any like district structure?
Yes, it applies to all limited purpose regionals, which is,
It's all based on equalized evaluation and the percent of high school students to total population within that town?
it applies equally, and what I, just to clarify that, it applies equally to all limited purpose regionals. And what that means is regionals that are like Frio Regional and are 9 to 12. So there are K to 8 school districts in each of the sending municipalities, or the member, not sending is the wrong word, member municipalities, and they all join for one high school district. So it's a limited purpose regional high school district, and this does apply across the state.
How many, do you know off the top, how many of these types of?
There are
31.
31
across the state.
Okay. And so back to what Vince was saying, our next course of action would be to interact with our state representatives.
And because it is statutory based, I would think that the best course is the legislative model. You can certainly try the Department of Education, but because the Department of Education is a branch of the executive branch, they're going to tell you there's really not much they can do. It's the legislative branch that's kind of got to take it from there.
Gentlemen, if just one other piece of information on, I think it was April, I want to say 7th, there was a presentation in this room that's available on our website and you're right on it, but as far as the breakdown of first by equalized value by students in those two categories, and then in relation to the other towns in the regional. But that information, the handouts, which include that information that you may find of interest, is available on our website.
April 7th.
Is it April 7th?
Was that your 2014-15?
No, it was the meeting before the 2014-15.
Very quickly, I'm sorry, Vince, just to comment on what you said about the modifier. I found it to be a fascinating example. When we go to Home Depot, we all pay the same price, but when the installer finds out we're from Colts Neck, they double the price and put it in. You know that. And it's unfair. Yeah, that's true. That's what we do.
What's the what we're saying here?
They're empathetic. Well, that doesn't mean that they agree.
I'm in agreement, Vince.
I agree in principle that the formula should be readdressed, what the end result should be. But as the board, wouldn't there be much greater impact if you folks approach
We do, but we have to be careful because in that model each year, just as Colts Neck has gone up, we've had a number of our municipalities also go down in the cost they bear. So it is a lightning rod for a number of reasons. It's all about what is that alternative, and then what is the impact to all 8 of the municipalities that we serve. And I think it would be disingenuous and I don't want to speak for the board, I'm only speaking as superintendent. I think it would be disingenuous to say we agree with that and we would it's all about what is on the other side and what does that alternative look like for all 8.
But not to agree, I'm not asking you to agree to my suggestion of how it should change. But you seem to all agree that it needs to be.
It's got to be examined. Yep.
Now, can I put that forth when I present this? If you're not willing to present it directly, can I put that position forward when I do present it to our legislators?
The board could only act if there were to be a motion by it to proceed. And again, just because there are so many various possible scenarios,
Why don't we do this? Why don't you give us until the next board meeting, perhaps, to do a little bit more due diligence about what has or has not occurred in relation to questioning the model? What have been some of the alternatives? Why have they not been acted on? And maybe when we have a little bit more information that's specific, the board would perhaps be more comfortable in saying whether they support or don't support something. But we're flying a little bit blind right now because we know that there's a problem with the model. We know that it ends up being disproportionate. We know that folks have looked at it to no avail. We know that Mr. Boyce has made some recommendations at the local level about how to mete out some of that variability, all of which has nothing's changed. But we have to also be a little careful on where we step to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. And if I've mischaracterized that, please, anybody chime in.
But I would like to add that when we do that, Mark, if you could also ask that they change to make all our votes equal as well.
I just said that.
Because I don't know if you know that, but even though I'm the
That
president
is
of the board,
actually-
my vote is less half. Of one
No, Mr. Moses, you're at .9.
I was going to say that.
And that is actually by a federal order that's been entered and is still in good standing.
2001. 2001. I remember when it was done. Yep.
But we do refer to the president as .8 and behind closed doors.
Don't sell him short. He's a .9.
.3.
.9. I'm .8.
Come back. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to take the entire agenda in one shot. Before we do so, I have to say something. There is a lady retiring from the Freehold Regional District after many years. She is the head secretary in the guidance department at Freehold Borough. Her name is Jerry Leone. I would like to say that this lady has great interpersonal skills. She's such a soft-spoken, kind woman. And I want to say that it's not unique. We have so many people who work in this district, particularly the secretaries, who are just really, really nice people and know how to treat people, whether that person is 17, 16, or they're 35 or whatever. So I just want to say that she's going to be sorely missed at the borough. I personally knew her for many, many years, and I'm sorry to see her go. Okay, the agenda in one shot.
As amended. As amended.
As amended.
Motion.
Second. Okay, any discussion on the agenda? Mr. Boyce?
Mr. Acetola?
Yes.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mrs. Canario? Oh, sorry. Mrs. Lappin?
Yes.
Mrs. Fankhauser?
Yes.
Mr. Messinger?
Yes.
Mrs. Satara?
Yes.
Ms. Tomazic?
Yes.
Mr. Moses?
Yes. Okay, old business.
I just want to take a moment to wish Mr. Moses a happy 65th birthday tonight. Wow. It's quite a milestone. He's spending it exactly where he wanted to be. His wife is waiting at my home right now. But happy birthday, Mr. Moses.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Medicare.
I have something I want to add.
Yes.
Not happy birthday, but something else. Tomorrow, in Manalapan, in the junior high school, well, the middle school, sorry, I'm showing my Brooklyn. They're having heroin is in our community. Something brought about by parents whose children were heroin addicts when they were addicted in the middle school. It'll be at 7 o'clock at MEMS if anyone's interested in attending.
Okay, any other old business? New business?
I'm a grandma. No,
Tomorrow, 7. Congratulations.
Thank you.
No new business? Hey, we have a
Motion.
motion. Second? So shall ye say, so shall it be written. Thank you for coming.